Hey guys, tonight we drift back into a world where parchment is precious. Ink is an art, and every scribble might carry the weight of a heart. You trudge through narrow cobblestone streets, the air heavy with smoke from hearths and the occasional whiff of unwashed livestock, clutching a letter that could change someone's life for simply vanish forever. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive this journey unscathed. Letters, like medieval relationships, have a funny way of disappearing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're at it, drop your location and the local time. We're about to travel together, even if centuries separate us. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are staring at a piece of parchment, smooth yet textured, freshly inked by someone whose heart is pounding as they finish their carefully composed lines. The words are full of longing, little flourishes curling around the edges of sentences. Maybe even a sketch of a heart, though medieval hearts, let's be honest, looked more like a misshapen potato than anything romantic. You can almost feel the sender's pulse through the fibers, a tangible vibration of hope and fear. Historians still argue whether medieval lovers were more likely to write poetry directly into letters or just scribble confessions in hurried bursts. But either way, your letter is alive with intention. You lift it carefully, tying it with a strip of ribbon or sealing it with a blob of wax, an imprint of a signet ring pressed into its surface. Wax seals were an art form themselves, and you can almost sense the smug satisfaction of the sender. Yes, my seal is perfect. No thief could dare break it without consequence. Except, of course, that thieves were surprisingly bold. And many a love letter fell prey to sticky fingers, curious eyes, or even nosy family members. There's something thrilling about imagining the chaos a single note could create in a tightly controlled medieval household. Now, picture the sender handing it to a messenger person whose entire livelihood depends on being fast, discreet, and, sometimes, not terribly sober. You probably won't survive the mental image of someone clutching their letter while riding a horse across muddy fields, dodging cows, avoiding carts, and occasionally swerving to keep from falling into the river. Messengers were the unsung heroes of correspondence, yet they had quirks. One might nap mid-journey, another might swap letters for bribes or gossip. You, standing in the sender's shoes, can feel the mixture of anticipation and terror. Will this letter survive? Will it even reach the intended person? And even if it does, will the words still make sense when they arrive? Ink was finicky, parchment was delicate, and the world was full of small disasters. You probably don't think much about how a letter moves from point A to point B in our modern world. A click, a swipe, and voila, digital love travels instantly, never sweating under the sun or shivering in the rain. But you are in a medieval setting, and every journey is a gamble. One slight mistake in direction or a single unexpected storm could render your message illegible or lost entirely. Imagine standing on a hilltop, watching the tiny figure of your messenger fade into a horizon of trees, dirt, roads, and rivers, knowing that you have just sent your hope on a voyage that might never end. Speaking of storms, you can feel the tension building in your chest as you imagine the letter getting caught in sudden rain. Water droplets soak into the parchment, smudging ink like watercolor on wet paper. You shiver at the thought this isn't just inconvenient, it's catastrophic for your carefully constructed emotions. Historians still argue whether medieval writers feared natural disasters more than human interception. And in your mind, both seem equally threatening. You picture a world where the weather conspires against your romance, and where every cloud overhead is a potential saboteur of your love life. Then there's the smell. Parchment has an earthy scent, ink smells metallic, and if the letter is wrapped in ribbon, there's a faint whiff of lavender or other herbs meant to preserve it. You inhale deeply, feeling the textures under your fingers, the slight grain of the parchment, the raised seal, the weight of the ribbon. Each sensation reminds you that a letter isn't just words, it's an object, a vessel of human presence, almost like holding a heartbeat in your hands. Quirky, maybe, but true. Medieval people often believed that the essence of the sender lingered in the ink itself, almost like a ghost traveling with the message. You might chuckle at the thought, imagining someone whispering to their letter, "Don't fail me now, little parchment ghost." And then the suspense hits. You hand the letter over, and the messenger nods solemnly. You watch as they adjust their hood, mount their horse, and vanish down the street. You feel the gravity of that moment. The letter is no longer yours. Its fate lies with the world outside your control. Muddy roads, errant livestock, bandits with sticky fingers, or rival suitors peeking at your message. You are left with only imagination and worry. Was it received? Was it read? Did it survive the first mile? You might lean against the doorframe, exhaling slowly, heart still racing from the act of letting go. You remember a fact about medieval letters that seems trivial, yet astonishing. Many letters simply never left the sender's town. They were misplaced, delayed, or destroyed by accident before the journey even began. Some historians speculate that as much as half of all correspondence from that era never reached its intended recipient. That's right, half. It makes modern email bounces feel like minor inconveniences in comparison. Quirky anecdote. Some letters were famously found centuries later stuffed into walls, hidden in wine casks, or used as kindling during winter. Your own letter could easily join that unpredictable fate. It's a sobering reminder that medieval love was an exercise in patience and luck, rather than certainty. And the stakes are high, because love letters weren't just casual notes. They carried the weight of societal norms, expectations, and sometimes danger. A letter could be evidence in a feud, proof of a scandalous relationship, or a treasured confession of unspoken desire. You probably imagine the sender whispering last-minute instructions. If it falls into the wrong hands, burn it immediately. Historians still argue whether such measures were effective or merely dramatized paranoia. Regardless, you feel the tension like a tightrope around your chest, the thrill of secrecy, the risk of exposure, and the hope that someone, somewhere, will understand your heart. And here's a little medieval twist. Some letters were sent with charms, small herbs, or even tiny relics tucked inside. These were believed to protect the message, enhance its romantic potency, or ward off evil spirits. You might grin at the image of a messenger accidentally dropping a sachet of rosemary into a mud puddle, turning a love letter into an aromatic mess. Life in the Middle Ages wasn't exactly efficient, and letters bore the quirks of every person and creature they encountered on their journey. You probably feel the suspense building as you imagine the messenger disappearing down the road, letter tied securely yet entirely at the mercy of the world. The journey has only begun, and already the story is haphazard, half hope. Remember the sense of wonder, the tactile thrill of holding a letter, the weight of expectation pressing on your chest like a small, heavy stone. Every journey starts this way: a spark of intention, a piece of parchment, and a world of uncertainty waiting outside the door. By now, you're invested not in some distant historical abstraction, but in the very real pulse of the sender's heart, in the slight tremor of ink under their fingertips, in the first step that sets centuries of lost letters into motion. You lean back, eyes closing for a second, imagining the letter bouncing along muddy roads, slipping into inns, or being nibbled by a curious dog. Each possibility is a story in itself, a mini-adventure, a precarious dance between survival and disappearance. You smile, knowing that this tiny rectangle of parchment carries more drama than most modern reality TV shows. And as the night deepens around you, the letter begins its journey, the first step of many, each fraught with chance, human error, and the endless chaos of medieval life. You settle into the rhythm of imagining each mile, each obstacle, each small triumph or tragedy. The letter leaves your hands, and suddenly, the medieval world seems infinitely larger, infinitely more unpredictable, and infinitely more alive than you could have imagined. The road stretches before you, a ribbon of mud, cobblestone, and dust that seems to go on forever. You step into the role of a messenger now, the freshly inked love letter secured under your arm, and immediately notice the chill in the air. Your boots sink into soft puddles, remnants of last night's rain, and you hear the squelch with every step. Around you, the medieval landscape unfurls, thatched roofs of cottages dot the horizon. Smoke curling lazily from chimneys, and the faint clatter of a cart's wheels echoing from the distance. Messengers didn't have the convenience of paved highways or GPS. Every mile was a gamble, and every bridge or ford a potential hazard. Historians still argue whether certain roads were safer than others, or if luck alone determined survival on these routes. You probably won't survive the thought of someone tripping over a loose stone, falling face first into mud, and taking a priceless love letter with them. But that, dear listener, was part of the job. You adjust the strap of your satchel and imagine the tension of a real messenger, who might be riding horseback for hours, sweating under a hooded cloak while keeping an eye out for trouble. Bandits were common along many trade routes, and a messenger with a bundle of letters was a tempting target. Sometimes the threat wasn't even human. A sudden storm could turn a road into a quagmire. Rivers might overflow and carts could topple, crushing the precious cargo inside. You can almost feel the anxiety in their chest, the constant awareness that one slip, one wrong turn, or one distracted moment could doom the journey entirely. Quirky as it sounds, messengers were also known to carry small charms or coins for protection, slipped into their boots or satchel, because why risk angering unseen spirits while traversing a muddy field? As you move deeper into this journey, you notice how the geography itself dictates your pace. Hills rise sharply, forcing the messenger to dismount and lead their horse, slowing progress and exposing the letter to wind, rain, and curious eyes. Dense forests loom on either side of the path, their shadows hiding animals, thieves, and perhaps even a wandering monk or two. You brush against low-hanging branches, imagining ink smudging, parchment tearing. You probably won't survive the thought that, in such conditions, a single misstep could erase days of effort and weeks of careful writing. Every mile adds suspense, and every obstacle transforms a simple delivery into a test of endurance, patience, and luck. The messenger passes a small village, the air thick with smoke from hearth fires and the smell of livestock. Children dart across the road, curious but oblivious to the treasures being transported. The inn at the crossroads emits the sounds of shouting, laughter, and clanging mugs. It's tempting, maybe even human, for a messenger to stop for a brief respite, but a pause could prove disastrous. Many letters were lost when messengers lingered too long in taverns, distracted by drink or gossip. Some of the most famous lost letters in history vanished precisely because the courier allowed a brief human indulgence to interrupt the mission. Historians still argue whether tavern-related losses accounted for a significant percentage of missing correspondence. But anecdotal evidence makes you shudder. You probably won't survive imagining a carefully penned sonnet soaked in spilled ale. The messenger must also negotiate political boundaries, often shifting as fast as the seasons. Small fiefdoms, lordships, and towns impose their own rules, tolls, and restrictions. A messenger's satchel could be inspected, letters read or confiscated, or delivery delayed for weeks. You feel a tight knot form in your stomach as you imagine handing over your beloved letter to a curious guard, whose interpretation of love note might be alarmingly literal. Some couriers resorted to clever tricks, folding the parchment in complex ways, sealing it inside hollowed-out sticks, or hiding it beneath mundane items. Quirky, but true, and evidence that medieval messengers were part athlete, part spy, part magician. You probably won't survive picturing the sheer ingenuity or sheer luck required to navigate these borderlands safely. Animals occasionally enter the story, not as carriers yet, but as hazards. A stray dog darts across the path, a cow steps unpredictably into the road, and birds scatter overhead, startling the messenger's horse. Every encounter is a small potential catastrophe. Ink smears from sudden contact, parchment bends awkwardly, and a moment's distraction can lead to injury or loss of cargo. You almost wish modern delivery came with airbags, but in the 14th century, you had only your wits, your boots, and your horse. Historians still argue whether messengers were more frequently injured by animals or humans, and the answer likely depends on the route, season, and sheer luck. You probably won't survive contemplating the daily tension of avoiding a cow while holding a love letter worth more than your monthly salary. Nightfall creeps in as you press on, and the landscape takes on an eerie hush. Owls hoot, a distant wolf howls, and your path becomes harder to discern. Lanterns flicker in windows, providing both guidance and potential threats' curious eyes. Possibly even the eyes of someone eager to intercept mail for scandal, mischief, or blackmail. You are acutely aware that the night is a double-edged sword, concealment from prying humans, but danger from shadows and missteps. You can feel the messenger's heartbeat echoing in your own chest. Some letters were lost in the dark simply because the courier took a misstep, fell into a ditch, or trusted a stranger offering directions. Quirky tidbit: a few messengers carried small musical instruments to ward off night spirits, soar, at least. That's what a handful of surviving accounts suggest. You probably won't survive picturing a lute-wielding courier tripping over roots while trying to honor superstitions. Every village along the route presents its own hazards and opportunities. Some are friendly, offering food, water, and rest. Others are suspicious, inspecting bags and questioning strangers. The messenger must navigate a delicate balance of politeness, subterfuge, and speed. You imagine yourself passing through each one, bowing to the mayor or lord, offering small coins to the local constable, and praying that no one reads your letter out of curiosity or malice. Historians still argue whether certain regions were notoriously risky or whether danger was evenly distributed. Either way, each stop is a new test of endurance. Rain begins to drizzle again, soft at first, then heavier, drumming against your hood and sleeves. You can almost feel the ink starting to blur, the parchment absorbing moisture like a sponge. You adjust the satchel to keep the letter safe, holding it close to your body, and realize how fragile this entire enterprise is. One small misstep, one unexpected puddle, one moment of distraction, and the contents of weeks of heartfelt labor could be lost. You probably won't survive imagining the sheer anxiety of a medieval courier navigating these elements, knowing that every drop could spell doom for love itself. By mid-journey, fatigue sets in. Muscles ache, eyes burn, and your horse seems to sense the strain, slowing at inconvenient moments. You catch a glimpse of yourself in a muddy puddle, haggard, smeared with mud, hair plastered to your forehead, and a letter that looks increasingly vulnerable. You laugh nervously, realizing that the romantic notion of a courier galloping heroically across the land is mostly false. Reality is trudging through mud, dodging obstacles, and hoping that the universe doesn't intervene too harshly. Quirky fact: some messengers reportedly rode through the night while singing or reciting prayers, partly to keep spirits up, partly to ensure they didn't fall asleep mid-journey. As the sun begins to rise, you see the next major village on the horizon, smoke curling from chimneys and livestock stirring. The sight is comforting, a temporary reprieve from the endless road. You imagine offering thanks to the local inns, maybe exchanging a few words with the villagers and checking the integrity of your cargo. Every mile survived is a victory, every obstacle overcome a small miracle. You probably won't survive thinking about the countless letters that didn't make it this far, destroyed by weather, human error, or sheer bad luck. And yet, despite the danger, the risk, and the unpredictability, the letter presses onward, carried by determination, hope, and the stubbornness of human emotion. The messenger's journey is far from over, but already you feel the rhythm of the road, the way it etches experience into your bones. The way the letter's fate becomes intertwined with your own. You remember that every mile traveled is a tiny triumph over entropy, a small rebellion against time and chance. And so you trudge forward, heart pounding, boots squelching, eyes scanning the path ahead, fully aware that this is just the beginning of a story that will wind through taverns, forests, and the whims of countless human hands. Every heartbeat, every step, is a testament to the courage or insanity of sending love across a medieval world that seemed determined to swallow it whole.
The inn appears at last, smoke curling from its chimney like a lazy question mark. And you, as the messenger, approach cautiously, feeling the tension of 100 potential disasters pressing down on your shoulders. Roadside taverns were both sanctuary and snare. You probably won't survive imagining the chaos inside. Laughter bouncing off timber-bird walls. The clatter of mugs, the smell of roasted meat and unwashed bodies blending into a sensory storm. You push the door open and are immediately engulfed by warmth, noise, and the pungent aroma of human life. Every surface seems sticky, every patron curious, and every shadow a potential hazard to your carefully preserved parcel of love. Historians still argue whether tavern mishaps accounted for a significant number of lost medieval letters, but anecdotal evidence is plentiful and colorful. You step carefully across the threshold, noting the uneven wooden floor, slick from spilled ale, and the scattering of straw where animals might have sought refuge. The tavern keeper eyes you warily, probably calculating the value of your coin versus the risk of intrusion. A dog snoozes near the hearth, stirring lazily at your presence, its nose twitching in curiosity. You adjust your grip on the letter. One slip here could undo days of careful effort. The inn is not merely a stopping point, but a crossroads where human error, curiosity, and indulgence converge, all conspiring to jeopardize the letter's survival. You spot a table tucked into a corner, its occupants a mix of travelers, merchants, and perhaps a slightly tipsy bard singing off-key. The temptation to linger is enormous. Food, warmth, perhaps even a chance to share a story about your arduous journey. But the letter is heavy in your satchel, and every second spent indulging in comfort increases the risk. You probably won't survive imagining a careless glance from a curious stranger spotting the wax seal and unrolling it out of sheer nosiness. You shift your weight and remind yourself that the mission is to deliver, not socialized. The chaos inside the inn only grows as more patrons arrive. Boots slap against the wooden floor, mugs clatter, and a minor scuffle breaks out near the hearth over a misplaced coin or insulted honor. The noise is deafening, and the letter, delicate and important, feels like a fragile bird in your hands. Quirky as it seems, some letters were lost precisely in such moments. Spilled ale soaking the ink, a dog bounding through the fray and tearing at the ribbon, or a distracted messenger bumping into a table and dropping the precious cargo. You can practically feel the panic that would set in. Historians still argue whether taverns were more dangerous than natural obstacles. But your gut tells you that here, human unpredictability reigns supreme. You take a careful step toward the counter, hoping to secure a brief respite or information about the next leg of your journey. A tipsy traveler leans too close, sniffing the air like a hound, and you tighten your grip on the satchel. Memories of famous lost letters come to mind, one supposedly used as kindling in precisely such a tavern mishap, another shredded underfoot in a stampede to escape a sudden argument. You probably won't survive imagining a medieval letter catching fire in someone else's negligence, while your own heart flutters helplessly. The innkeeper finally approaches, eyes darting from your soaked cloak to the bundle under your arm. You attempt a polite nod, hoping to convey that you need only brief shelter, perhaps a drink of water and a place to rest your weary limbs. But even this minor transaction is a gamble. Inns were notorious for misplaced items, inattentive staff, and patrons with sticky fingers. A single lapse could erase days of effort and hope, leaving the sender's carefully penned emotions at the mercy of chaos. You probably won't survive picturing the letter slipping behind the counter, only to resurface years later as part of a family archive. Forgotten until archaeologists stumble upon it centuries later. You manage to secure a corner near the fire, just enough to warm yourself without inviting unwanted attention. Every movement is calculated. The messenger knows instinctively how to navigate the tumult, how to avoid spilling the ink or dropping the wax-sealed bundle. You watch the dances of shadow and light, the patron's gestures and expressions, and every twitch of a hand or tilt of a head becomes a potential threat. Quirky anecdote. One medieval courier reportedly carried a small rodent in a pocket, hoping it would distract aggressive cats in taverns and protect precious letters. You probably won't survive imagining a tiny rat dodging mug swings and human legs while guarding your love letter. Outside, the rain continues, soft yet insistent, drumming a rhythm against the roof. You can almost feel the droplets sneaking through thatch, threatening the fragile parchment within your satchel. Each sound becomes amplified, each cough from a nearby patron a reminder of the vulnerability of the mission. Historians still argue how often weather-related damage occurred at inns versus on the open road. But your instinct tells you the danger is significant. You probably won't survive the anxiety that comes with knowing a single soaked thread could make the sender's emotions illegible. A brawl erupts near the entrance. Chairs topple, mugs fly, and the clamor grows. You instinctively shift the satchel to protect the letter, heart racing, palms sweaty. In moments like these, human folly becomes the most dangerous adversary. You probably won't survive imagining the letter being trampled underfoot. Ink smudged irreversibly, the wax seal crushed into a sticky blob. It's not just the message that's at risk, it's the sender's heart, the weight of weeks of careful thought, and the fragile trust placed in you as the messenger. You notice a small group gathered around a table, whispering, occasionally glancing toward you. Curiosity, mischief, or outright malice could be motives hard to tell in this lively chaos. You adjust your posture, keeping the satchel close, hoping to make yourself blend into the background. Quirky observation. Medieval inns sometimes had official notice boards or public reading tables where letters and messages could be accidentally or intentionally left for strangers. You probably won't survive picturing a fellow traveler plucking the letter from your satchel, reading a stolen confession of love aloud, and leaving chaos in their wake. A brief lull arrives, just enough for you to catch your breath and assess the damage. So far, the letter is intact. The wax seal slightly scuffed, the ribbon dampened, but the ink legible. You exhale, feeling a small triumph, even as the tavern continues its lively chaos. This is the rhythm of medieval messengers. Survival measured in moments of calm between storms of human error, curiosity, and accident. Historians still argue whether letters lost in taverns were more due to negligence or sheer bad luck, and you suspect it was an unpredictable combination of both. The innkeeper finally brings a small bowl of broth, and you accept it cautiously, sipping while keeping one eye on the room. Every patron movement is a potential threat to the letter's safety. You probably won't survive the tension. Imagining the letter slipping from your grasp if a stray elbow or falling mug hits just right. Even as you eat, your mind races through strategies to keep the parchment safe, folding it differently, tucking it under your arm, pressing it closer to your chest. Every action is a calculated dance, a negotiation with chance itself. Outside, the rain lightens to a drizzle, promising only a temporary reprieve. You know the road awaits, with its mud, rivers, and unpredictable obstacles. The tavern, a brief sanctuary, has reminded you of just how fragile the journey is. Quirky tidbit. Some messengers reportedly hid letters inside loaves of bread or hollowed out vegetables to protect them from the chaos inside inns, a strategy that sometimes worked, sometimes ended with soggy, illegible parchment. You probably won't survive imagining a love letter steaming inside a loaf, fully baked and slightly charred at the edges. Finally, you rise, satchel secure, and prepare to rejoin the muddy road. The patrons are preoccupied with their own dramas. The fire crackles, and the smell of roasted meat still clings to the air. You step carefully out the door, feeling the weight of the letter once more, aware of how many have been lost before reaching this point. Historians still argue whether inns were the most perilous part of a messenger's journey, but today you've witnessed firsthand why the question matters. Every second, every movement, every footfall is an unpredictable roll of the dice, where love, chance, and human folly intersect. As you mount your horse and feel the cool drizzle against your face, you carry not only a letter but the weight of its journey and the fragile hope it represents. The inn fades behind you, and the road stretches on, demanding vigilance, endurance, and perhaps a little luck. You probably won't survive imagining all the letters that never make it past this stage, consumed by chaos, curiosity, or clumsy humans, but somehow yours has survived. For now. And as you ride, you realize that this leg of the journey, fraught with human unpredictability, is just one chapter in a long, twisting path that letters would take across medieval Europe. Every mile survived is a triumph, every obstacle overcome a testament to the tenacity of human desire.
You step through the narrow passageway that leads deeper into the village's hidden night world, a place most travelers never see because they sleep too early or keep too close to their hearth. But tonight, you move with the quiet confidence of someone who knows the darkness is not an enemy, but a guide. The stones beneath your feet are smoothed by centuries of steps, farmers, children, monks. Merchants all walking this same path before dawn, before chores, before life begins again. The air is colder here. You can feel it settle into your sleeves and creep along your neck. A thin mist clings to the ground, low and slow, almost hesitant, like it's thinking about rising, but hasn't made up its mind yet. Medieval mist isn't like modern fog. This one feels alive, textured, flavored with smoke, clay, sheep wool, and last evening's cooking fire that never completely died out. You follow the curve of the path until it opens into a small courtyard. It's not marked on any map, not named, not described in any guild record. It exists simply because people have used it for centuries. In the center stands a trough carved from a single log, overflowing with cold water fed from a channel that runs down from the hills. The water reflects the moon like a shard of broken silver. You dip your hand in. The shock is immediate ice cold, almost painful, cleansing in a way that feels ancient. Around the trough sit 3 buildings, each with its own personality. One is tall and narrow, a craftsman's workshop with tools hanging on exterior beams. Another is squat, almost windowless storage of some kind, used to keep dried fish or barley or tools that can't be left out in the elements. The third is brighter, its windows glowing with a soft amber light. A baker, perhaps. Bakers rise long before the sun. As you walk past the glowing window, you hear the rhythmic thud of dough being kneaded. A simple sound, but powerful. In medieval life, that thud means survival. It means families will eat in a few hours. It means another day has a beginning. You slow your pace to listen. Each strike of fist against dough echoes like a heartbeat of the village. Somewhere behind the bakery, a rooster begins crowing prematurely, confused by the lantern light inside. Another rooster farther away answers, annoyed, as though arguing about whose job it is to announce dawn. Their calls ripple through the village, bouncing against thatched roofs and timbered walls. You turn toward a narrow lane leading west. Here, the houses grow older, their timber frames leaning slightly as though bowing to the weight of time. The moonlight reveals details only seen at night. The pattern of wattle and daub, the rough hand-hewn texture of beams, the uneven surfaces shaped not by machines, but by human effort. You run your fingers lightly along a wall, feeling the ridges and grooves. Every inch is a story. A door creaks open a few houses down. You pause. A woman steps out carrying a small clay jar. Her hair is wrapped in a cloth, her shoulders draped in a wool shawl. She doesn't see you. Her focus is on the jar. She kneels beside a small shelf built into the wall outside her home. She places the jar there and murmurs something too soft to hear. For a moment, you wonder if you've stumbled into something sacred. But then you remember, medieval people leave offerings all the time, not grand sacrifices, but tiny gestures to saints, ancestors, or spirits of the home. A bit of bread, a drop of ale, a sprig of herbs, not because they expect miracles, but because it makes the world feel less unpredictable. When she goes back inside, the door closes gently and the village swallows the sound. You continue toward the edge of the settlement. The ground slopes downward, the houses thinning out. Ahead, you see a large fenced area where livestock sleeps in clusters. Sheep lying like soft mounds of wool. Pigs curled into warm heaps. A cow resting with its head low, eyes half open in that serene animal way. The smell is strong manure, straw, damp hay, oddly comforting. This is the smell of survival, of warmth, of winter not winning. A stable boy sits on an overturned bucket wrapped in a cloak too big for him. He strokes the mane of a horse that refuses to sleep. The lantern beside him flickers, casting two shadows, boy and horse merging into one shape on the barn wall. You hear him humming softly. Not a melody you recognize. Perhaps a local tune passed down from worker to worker. Or maybe something he invented to pass the time. His voice is gentle, barely above a whisper. You don't disturb him. Moments like these are too pure to interrupt. Just beyond the livestock yard lies the drying green, a large open area where villagers hang herbs, cloth, and tools during the day. At night, it becomes an empty field, vast and quiet, flanked by rows of cottages. You step onto the green, your boots brushing against frost-tipped grass. Here, the wind moves more freely. It carries with it the smell of rosemary and thyme left to dry earlier in the afternoon. The scents drift through the darkness like soft threads of memory. As you cross the green, you notice a faint glimmer near the far wall. At first, you think it's a lantern, but as you approach, you see a small circle of candles placed around a stone bench. Someone has created a makeshift shrine, perhaps to a lost relative, perhaps to a patron saint, or perhaps simply because this is the quietest place in the village. The candles burn steadily despite the cold air, their light reflecting off the smooth stone surface. You sit on the edge of the bench. The candles crackle softly, their flames wavering just enough to look alive. You feel the weight of the village around you, the people asleep behind wooden walls. The animals breathing in slow harmony, the fires burning low in clay hearths. Medieval night is not empty. 'Tis full of life, lived quietly. A soft rustle catches your ear. You turn to see an elderly man approaching with a cane. His cloak drags slightly in the mud, his boots worn, his breath visible in weak puffs. When he reaches the candles, he kneels with surprising steadiness and closes his eyes. For a full minute, he stays perfectly still. It feels sacred to watch. When he finishes, he rises, nods once at the candles, and turns back the way he came, disappearing into the shadows as though swallowed by time itself. You stand as well, letting the moments settle inside you. Then you continue walking, leaving the green behind. The next section of the village feels different, denser. Older, shaped more by survival than by comfort. Walls lean closer together. A faint smell of iron hangs in the air, telling you the blacksmith's forge is nearby. Even now, with the fire extinguished for the night, the scent lingers. Charcoal, scorched metal, hardened sweat. You find the forge easily. The anvil sits like a monument in the center of the workspace, surrounded by tools hanging in perfect order. You step closer. The forge is cold, but you can still sense the memory of fire, the heat that once lived here, shaping plow blades and horseshoes and kitchen knives. The blacksmith's hammer rests on a stump, worn smooth by years of use. You place your hand near it, feeling a subtle warmth that isn't physical but simply the residue of human labor. Farther down the lane, you hear a muffled thump. Then another. Then a rhythm. You follow the sound until you reach a dimly lit house. Through a crack in the shutters, you glimpse a man working at a long wooden table. He's carving something wood, splinters falling like snowflakes onto the floor. A wooden spoon, a bowl, a toy you don't know, but you understand the rhythm. This is the hour when people who don't have time by day steal a little time at night. The path takes you toward the last row of houses before the forest begins. Beyond this point, the village gives way to wilderness, a place filled with silence and danger. You pause by the final cottage. Smoke curls from its chimney, faint and ghostly. A faint sound comes from inside, a lullaby. The gentle kind sung by a tired parent who has already sung too many tonight. The melody drifts through the cracks in the door and slips into the air like a small gift. You don't understand the words, but you feel their warmth. Finally, you reach the forest edge. The trees loom tall, their branches heavy with night moisture. The forest is darker than the village, deeper, more mysterious. But it doesn't frighten you. Instead, it pulls you forward with the promise of a new kind of quiet, tangent, quiet, untouched quiet. You take one step into the trees, then another, and the medieval night deepens all around you. You move a little deeper beneath the forest canopy, letting the branches close above you like an old wooden gate. The air changes almost instantly. It becomes thicker, quieter, cushioned by layers of pine needles and damp soil that swallow the sound of your steps. You're not far from the village. Its dim glow still presses faintly against the tree line behind you, but here, in the undergrowth, the night feels older and heavier, as though the forest has been waiting for you with the patience of centuries. A thin wind slips through the branches overhead, nudging them into small, creaking conversations. Some trees groan, others whisper, their leaves rustling like a crowd exchanging secrets. You pull your cloak a little tighter, though the cold is not the real reason. There's something about medieval forests that makes your imagination sit up straight and say, hey, maybe don't die tonight. But you continue onward, 'cause you came here for something more hidden than fear. A faint glow appears to your right, orange, flickering, rhythmic. A torch, its flame sways like a restless spirit, casting long shadows that stretch and shrink with each breath of wind. As you step closer, you see a small wooden structure built into the hillside. The Lord's Way Gate, guarded by a single man whose job requires far more suspicion than sleep. He leans against a post cloak bundled around him, helmet slightly askew as if he's been fighting off boredom more than invaders. His spear rests across his lap. A small lantern hangs above him, burning with a bright, steady flame that draws moths into tiny suicidal spirals. You approach quietly but not sneakily. The last thing you want is to startle a man holding a spear in the dark. When he finally notices you, he straightens, squinting through the veil of night. "Traveling early," he mutters, his voice gravelly from cold air and long hours awake. You can tell he's been stationed here since before midnight. He has that particular exhaustion that medieval night guards perfected, half suspicious, half sleepwalking. Before you can answer, he taps the wooden chest beside him. It's about the size of a large bread loaf, reinforced with iron bands. The lid is carved with the Lord's crest, a bird in flight holding a scroll. You recognize it instantly. This is the interception box, the reason Section 5 exists. Many medieval lords insisted on controlling everything that passed through their lands: grain, trade goods, travelers, and letters. Especially letters. You watch as the guard lifts the lid. Inside sits a stack of folded parchment, some tied with ribbon, others sealed with wax. A few look crisp and fresh. Others appear wrinkled, smudged, exhausted, like they've had a long week of being stuffed into belts and pockets. "So many messages coming and going lately," the guard says. "Can't be too careful." His tone tells you he's repeating what he's been told, not what he believes. Still, orders are orders. And those letters, love notes, business requests. Family news are not going anywhere until someone higher up decides they may pass. You lean closer and see one letter near the top that catches your eye. A neat hand. A wax seal shaped like a heart, rare, delicate. Someone spent time on it, maybe even whispered to it before sealing it. This is the kind of letter that could change someone's life, or never reach them at all. You imagine the writer hunched over a wooden table by candlelight, trying to choose the right words. Maybe it was a young woman confessing affection for a miller's son. Maybe it was a merchant missing his wife. Maybe it was someone begging for forgiveness. You'll never know. The guard certainly doesn't know. But the Lord might be curious enough to read it before deciding whether to let it through. You glance at the chest again. It holds stories, secrets, please, promises, and it's locked shut with iron, because letters are power in a world where information moves slower than rivers freeze. The guard clears his throat. "If you're headed through this gate, I've got to." He gestures vaguely, meaning he's supposed to search you, question you, maybe detain you if you look too suspicious. You decide to spare him the trouble and give a small nod that says, "Relax, it's fine, you're doing great. Please don't stab me." He accepts it. He looks grateful someone understands. Behind him, the torch snaps loudly, sending up a small spray of sparks. They dance into the air like tiny fire fairies, then vanish into darkness. As you pass under the waygate, you feel its shadow settle over your shoulders. This is still the Lord's land. But beyond the gate, travelers become less predictable. Messages become less controlled, and stories become less tidy. You follow a dirt path downhill, your boots slipping slightly on damp leaves. Soon, torches appear ahead, two of them flanking a small wooden bridge. A pair of gatekeepers stand there, wrapped in heavy cloaks, their breath rising in pale clouds. One pokes at the frozen earth with the butt of his spear. The other yawns so deeply you hear his jaw pop. They straighten when they hear your steps. One steps forward, lifting his torch high. The light catches his features, a light catches his features carved across his face, the kind earned by years of watching other people's troubles pass by in the dark. "You're early," he says. Not hostile, just tired. Or late. Hard to tell. You ask what he's guarding, and he gestures toward a small wooden building beside the bridge. A message house. Mid-level authority. Higher than the village guard, lower than the Lord. The kind of place where mail might be sorted, questioned, searched, or simply forgotten. Bandits on the road 2 nights ago, the older guard says, took a whole sack of letters from a messenger. Could have been innocent news, could have been treason. Can't take chances. You nod, though a part of you aches at the thought. Letters personal, hopeful. Heartfelt tumbled into the mud while bandits rummaged for coins. Some messages opened, others tossed aside. Some may be stuffed into a pouch, destined for ransom, or twisted into gossip for the right buyer. The guards let you pass after only a glance at your belongings. You suspect they're too tired to be suspicious. After all, it's nearly dawn, and the cold makes everyone less ambitious. Past the bridge, the path cuts through a narrow ravine. The air grows sharper. You can smell iron in the rocks, moss soaking up dew, the faint sourness of old leaves crushed underfoot. Your breath clouds in front of you. The world has shrunk to the torchlight halo around you. When the ravine widens, you find another sign of authority. A wooden platform raised 4 feet off the ground, with a roof but no walls. On it sits a man at a table, quill in hand, lantern by his elbow, ledger open before him. His nose is red from cold, but his posture is rigid, precise. He's the kind of person who would alphabetize the sheep if someone asked him. He glances up, annoyed to be interrupted, mid-scribble, name. You give a small shrug, which is medieval for, "Let's pretend I'm not important." He sighs, dips his quill in ink, and writes something anyway. The ink glistens in the lantern glow. Beside him lies another box. Smaller than the Lord's chest, but still sealed. Letters for inspection. Letters waiting for approval that might never be granted. Letters whose writers will wait weeks, wondering if their words ever made it to the world. You think of one sealed letter in particular, the heart-shaped seal. Still waiting, still trapped, still unread. As you continue walking, you can almost hear the echo of parchment shifting inside those boxes. A faint whisper of a love confession trapped behind iron. A plea for marriage pinned under a lord's boredom. A secret poem folded too carefully to be ignored. It hits you. The people who wrote those letters will never know what happened after the wax cooled. You leave the checkpoint behind and follow the road as it winds between low hills. The first hints of dawn begin to stain the horizon, a pale silver. A rooster crows from somewhere far off, confused and early, as usual. The world feels like it's waking up slowly, stretching its limbs after a long medieval sleep. A fox darts across the road ahead of you, a rabbit in its mouth. It pauses just long enough to give you a judgmental look, as if you, personally, are the reason the forest is chaotic and then disappears into the undergrowth. You whisper, "Good luck, buddy." even though the rabbit is having a decidedly less lucky morning. In the distance, a new settlement appears, a collection of stone buildings clustered around a fortified gate. This is where letters go to be sorted by authority, suspicion, and the whims of people who may never meet the writers. You walk toward the gate. The moment you step inside, you'll see exactly what happens to messages that don't make it past the people in charge. And somewhere, maybe still unopened, rests that heart-sealed letter waiting for a destiny it might never meet. You step through the fortified gate as early dawn finally brushes light across the stone walls, revealing a settlement that feels older and more disciplined than the village you left behind. The buildings here stand straighter, tighter, sturdier as though hammered into obedience by generations of monks, scribes, and well-meaning overseers. The scent of damp parchment hangs in the air, strangely comforting, like old libraries mixed with the faint sourness of ink that never fully dried. You recognize instantly where you've arrived: an abbey complex, sprawling and serene, in that don't touch anything or you'll get assigned to copying psalms kind of way. This is the realm of the medieval monastic sorting halls, where letters didn't simply pass through, but got absorbed, examined, replicated, archived, misplaced, refiled, and occasionally buried under centuries of temporary storage. Ahead of you rises the main scriptorium, a long stone building with slit windows that leak little more than a thin streak of light. Inside, you hear the faint scratching of quills already at work. Monks operate on a schedule powered by sunrise, bells, and eternal guilt. So of course, they're awake before most roosters realize they have a job. You make your way inside. The moment you cross the threshold, the air cools sharply stone, gripping the night's chill and refusing to let go. Rows of desks stretch before you, each equipped with quills carved to obsessive perfection. Candles burn low in iron holders, flickering like nervous students about to take an exam. A young monk looks up as you enter. His eyes are tired but curious, as if he's been copying the same sentence for an hour and will accept any excuse to stop. His tonsure gleams in the candlelight, half halo, half haircut taxident. He gives a small nod and returns to his work, dipping his quill with a sigh so old it should be wearing medieval orthopedic shoes. You walk farther down the aisle. That's when you see it. A large table covered with letters, not arranged, not sorted, just present. Some are neatly stacked. Others lie scattered as though dropped by a panicked messenger who thought, "I'll just put these here for a moment," and then promptly died or forgot or ran away to become a shepherd. You pick up one parchment. The handwriting is gentle, elegant, precise, the kind used by someone educated enough to write, but emotional enough to make mistakes. A small correction mark in the corner shows the writer changed their mind mid-sentence. A faint smear of wax along the edge suggests the seal was almost crooked and hastily fixed. There's no sign of its intended destination. It's as if the letter itself gave up halfway, deciding it didn't want to be delivered after all. A bell rings somewhere outside, deep, resonant, vibrating through the stone walls in a long echo. A moment later, several monks rise from their desks like quiet ghosts and glide toward the far end of the hall. You follow them, partly out of curiosity, partly because they move with the sort of calm that makes you think, "Yeah, sure, I'll walk toward that mysterious door. What's the worst that could happen?" Beyond the door lies a second chamber. Dimmer, drier. Air thick with dust, so ancient it probably has strong opinions about early medieval politics. Shelves line the walls from floor to ceiling, each packed with scrolls, folded letters, loose sheets, and bound codices that clearly weren't intended to be together, but somehow ended up living as roommates. A monk steps forward, an older man with eyebrows so magnificent they could file their own tax returns. He lifts a candle and gestures for you to come closer. "This," he murmurs, "is where the unclaimed and undecided are kept." It's less a statement and more a confession. You look at the shelves again. Some letters have crumbled into fragile, flaky layers, papery fossils of lost emotions. Others are perfectly intact, protected by random luck and the fact that nobody bothered to move them for centuries. Some scrolls are tied with frayed strings. Others are wrapped in leather that has darkened with age and absorbed the smell of wood smoke. A few shelves lean dangerously, as if one firm sneeze would send them into a dramatic collapse. The monk notices your concern and whispers, "They've been leaning like that for 60 years. Don't worry." Which, of course, means you now worry deeply. You spot another letter near the front of a stock-folded square of parchment with a pale green ribbon. The ribbon's color has faded, but you suspect it once symbolized something meaningful. Maybe hope, maybe friendship. Maybe the writer just liked green. That person will never know this ribbon outlived their intentions. Inside, the ink has faded to a soft brown, but the words are still legible. A simple declaration. A promise to meet in summer, to speak honestly, to try again. You feel the weight of it, the way the writer must have hesitated, wondering whether such courage would be returned. But the letter never left the abbey. You hand it back to the older monk, who takes it reverently, almost as if he recognizes it. Maybe he's read it before. Maybe he reads these lost letters when the nights grow too long and the world feels a little too heavy. "There are thousands," he says. "We tried to sort them once, but they multiplied." You blink. "Letters don't multiply," he adds. "Well, multiplied, because people kept adding more before we could finish." Ah, monastic humor. One monk in the corner coughs loudly, perhaps in agreement. Perhaps because medieval dust has no mercy. The older monk leads you deeper into the archive. The floor slopes downward gradually until you realize the lower shelves sit partially below ground level. Here, the air becomes colder, almost still. The walls glisten with moisture from the earth pressing in from the outside. "Some letters," he says softly, "were never meant to be read by us. But they were passed through our hands anyway." You pause at the next shelf and see something extraordinary, a pile of parchment that clearly wasn't meant to be stored as letters. Each one is covered in scribbles, practice alphabets, trial signatures, doodles of geometric shapes. But beneath those scribbles, faint outlines of earlier writing peek through. Reused parchment. Someone's love letter was scraped clean and repurposed for monastic handwriting practice. The thought hits you in the chest. A letter once held so closely written with trembling hope. Sealed with courage reduced to a surface for a novice monk to practice drawing the perfect G. The monk notices your reaction. "Parchment is expensive," he explains, gently. "Recycling is necessary." But yes, sometimes we discover things we didn't expect. He gestures toward the far corner of the room, where a stack of scrolls sits atop a cracked wooden crate. Those, he says, were found sealed inside the walls last year. You ask how that could happen? "Carelessness," he answers. "Or a hurried attempt to hide something. Or perhaps the builders thought the walls would protect them." Historians still argue whether monks deliberately stored letters this way sealed inside floors and walls, or whether they simply lost control of their archives and everything drifted into strange corners over time. You suspect the truth is a blend of both, with a sprinkling of "we'll deal with it tomorrow" that every era understands. You kneel beside the crate. Most scrolls are too fragile to unroll, but one sits loosely enough that you gently lift it. The seal is broken. The parchment unfurls easily. Inside is a simple poem, just 4 lines, written in shaky script. Likely someone young, someone brave, someone trying their hand at poetry for the first time. The words are clumsy, earnest, painfully sweet. The kind of poem you would never show anyone unless you trusted them completely. And yet, here it is in a monastic storage chamber, centuries removed from the person it was meant for. You roll it back up gently and set it down. The candlelight flickers across the shelves, creating shadows that stretch long and thin across the stone floor. A faint breeze erosion unknown whispers through the room, stirring a few loose pages into soft trembles. You feel it brushing your cheeks like cold fingers. "Come," the elder monk says, placing a hand on your shoulder. There is one more place. He leads you through a narrow door at the back of the archive. It opens into a small, cramped chamber with a low ceiling and a dirt floor. The smell hits you instantly: earth, mildew, forgotten time. This, he says, is where the oldest letters sleep. You look around. Bundles of parchment lie in heaps, wrapped in cloth that has long since darkened with age. Some bundles are tied with faded cords. Others simply rest in piles, their edges curling inward like sleeping hands. These were found during renovations, he explains. Beneath the floorboards, beneath the choir, beneath the refectory. Letters kept slipping through cracks, and we only discovered them centuries later. You don't even get a moment to catch your breath before the sky itself decides to join the conspiracy against medieval romance. One moment you're stepping out of the abbey's long shadow, carrying that little love letter like it's a candle flame cupped in your palms. On the next, fat raindrops start falling like someone up there is knocking angrily on a door. You don't run, not exactly, but you tilt your head forward and trudge onward, letting the drizzle quickly escalate into the kind of downpour that makes parchment curl like a frightened animal. You try shielding the letter beneath your cloak, but the ink still begins to bleed, turning delicate lines into dark, blurry rivers. Medieval ink was tough, sure, but not angry cloud tantrum tough. And yes, there's your first joke. Even the sky is petty tonight. As you slog forward, you feel the weight of the weather, not metaphorically, but literally, because your wool mantle is now holding about 3 kilograms of water on its own. Every step squelches. Your shoes make that sad blorp sound that tells you you'll have trench foot by sunrise. Somewhere off the road, a frog croaks, probably laughing at you. You can almost hear it say, "Historians still argue whether you should have just stayed inside the abbey." You know, but no, you push onward because this letter matters, even if the universe seems committed to sabotaging it. The fascinating part is that weather wasn't just an inconvenience for medieval messages. It was one of the primary executioners. There's an actual historical fact for you. Many letters were never delivered simply because the materials themselves couldn't survive the journey. Parchment was better than paper, sure, but even high-quality parchment hates humidity, hates cold, hates heat, hates wind actually. Parchment hates pretty much everything except being dry, flat, and left alone. So when couriers crossed mountain passes in winter, entire bundles of correspondence froze solid. Riders would arrive at the next village, thaw out the letters by the fire, and discover the ink had cracked off like tiny flakes of burnt sugar. Sometimes the message became readable only in fragments, like ancient scrolls that refused to cooperate. And sometimes they didn't survive at all. You tighten your grip as though the pressure alone will stop the rainwater seeping into the fibers. But nature is relentless. A gust of wind slaps the side of your hood, and suddenly the letter is trembling in your fingers. You press it to your chest like it's a pet trying to escape. Modern, you probably forgot how much power storms once held. Without sealed envelopes, without waterproof satchels, without plastic, anything. A heavy storm could erase the most heartfelt confession before the messenger even made it past the second village. You know how today we complain about slow Wi-Fi? Imagine waiting 3 months for a letter telling you whether or not your crush likes you back, and then finding out the courier dropped it in a puddle. That's emotional damage on a medieval scale. Lightning cracks across the sky with the flair of someone who enjoys dramatic timing. You squint upward, half expecting a giant finger to poke the letter out of your hand just for fun. And the road itself is no help. It's turning into a slurry of mud, roots, and questionable brown substances that you absolutely refuse to investigate. You slip, you catch yourself on a bush. The bush responds by stabbing you with thorns. The world is full of love tonight. Just absolutely not the kind written in the letter you're carrying. You glance down to check the damage. The edges are softening. The ink swirls slightly where the sender wrote the word beloved, now looking more like Belov, followed by an ominous smudge. Your heart sinks. You imagine the messenger centuries ago, maybe a young man on a borrowed horse, squinting at the rain-blasted parchment and thinking, well, maybe they can guess the rest. Oh, one quirky tidbit. Some couriers were instructed to memorize the message aloud in case the document got destroyed along the route. Which sounds impressive until you remember human memory is unreliable, especially when cold, hungry, and trying not to die. Imagine receiving a letter that says, "My dearest OK, I forgot the middle part." Something about admiration and, also, your eyes are nice. Not exactly swoon material. You keep walking because stopping would just let the rain win. The path narrows, lined with dripping trees that loom like judgmental uncles at a family reunion. A branch snaps behind you, startling you so badly you nearly drop the letter. Definitely just a deer, you tell yourself. Definitely not something hungry. And there's your second joke. Even the forest creatures seem annoyed you're dragging soggy romance through their territory. A clearing opens ahead, and you duck beneath a large rock outcrop for a moment of shelter. The rain pounds overhead like someone throwing buckets from the sky. You take out the letter, lift a corner gently, and evaluate the casualty. It isn't ruined not yet, but it's dangerously close. The ink from the sender's name bleeds into a dramatic dark halo, like a medieval watercolor gone wrong. And yet you realize something strangely beautiful. Even damaged, even distorted, the letter still carries meaning. Love is stubborn like that. Water dribbles off your sleeve, forming a puddle at your feet. You watch the ripples spread, thinking about how fragile communication once was. A single storm could change lives. Lovers separated by miles relied on weather, chance, and physical endurance. It makes you appreciate how determined people were to stay connected in spite of everything. And it highlights why so many letters never arrived. They were simply defeated by the elements long before they reached their destination. You step back into the storm, determined to keep going. The road tilts downward, and wind sweeps across it like a giant invisible broom. A tree creaks overhead. You duck, instinctively holding the letter even closer. A memory comes to you, one more historical fact. Coastal couriers often waited days or even weeks for storms to pass, refusing to risk their cargo in unpredictable seas or mountain winds. Some of them wrote notes in margins, like, "Held back for days by rain-prey sender, understands." You imagine them, huddled in tiny cottages, warming their hands over smoky braziers, praying that the weather would show mercy. But the weather rarely cares about prayers. You hike forward, feeling the wind push against your ribs. The rain flicks your cheeks like cold fingers. Your hood slips back, and you yank it up again before the storm steals it. The path winds between trees, then opens into a stretch of exposed hillside where the wind hits you full force. It tries, repeatedly, to snatch the letter from your hands, like a bored teenager picking pockets at a fair. You clutch tighter. Your boots slide on wet grass one step, another, then a skid that feels like the ground is trying to yeet you into a ravine. You flail, regain balance, and whisper a shaky nope. In the Middle Ages, many couriers didn't survive falls like that. A soaked slope, dark night, no railing knit was a bad combo. And here's your third joke. OSHA would have had a meltdown. You finally reach the bottom of the hill and take shelter behind a crumbling stone wall, shaking water from your eyelashes. The letter looks worse now, but still alive, barely. You imagine the sender's people who poured hope, longing, maybe apology into ink, never knowing their words drowned halfway there. Historians still argue whether the emotional cost of lost letters influenced courtship patterns or simply made people more creative at sending messages. Maybe both. As you stare at the blurred ink, you realize something important. Weather didn't just ruin letters. It reshaped destinies. A ruined confession meant a relationship that never began. A lost promise meant someone waited months for a reply that was already melted into the ground. Entire lives shifted because rain fell at the wrong moment. You press the letter to your chest one more time, take a breath, and step back into the storm. You step carefully through the dampened path, aware that every creature in this forest has its own agenda. The air smells of wet moss and earthy decay, with a faint trace of manure reminding you that medieval villages and their surroundings were never just picturesque. They were alive and often hungry. You clutch the letter a little closer to your chest, as though sheer proximity could ward off predators, and begin to notice the movement among the trees, the subtle twitch of leaves, the rustle of small paws, and the occasional flicker of a tail disappearing behind a root. First, a pigeon lands on a low branch above your head. You pause. Pigeons were, of course, famous medieval message carriers. Homing pigeons delivered notes over long distances, sometimes even in wartime. But this one doesn't seem particularly interested in service or loyalty. It coos softly, flutters down to a rock near your foot, and pecks at the edge of your cloak. You hold your breath. You can almost hear its thoughts. What is this soft, mysterious bundle you call clothing? I must investigate. That is your first minor terror of the day, and your first chuckle because, truly, the medieval world gave you a lot of obstacles that weren't human at all. The pigeon hops closer, one claw raised like it is conducting some invisible symphony. You take a step back, and in that instant it flaps upward again, narrowly avoiding your shoulder. Birds, you realize, are selective collaborators. They can be messengers, yes, but also tiny saboteurs. Historians still argue whether medieval scribes intentionally chose pigeons over other animals because of their homing instinct, or simply because they had fewer feathers to clean up afterward. Either way, their contribution to lost letters was significant. A single misdirected flap of wings could send weeks of carefully penned emotion tumbling into oblivion. You resume walking, aware of the soft padding behind you. A goat appears at the edge of the clearing, its horns tilted at an inquisitive angle. Goats have long been notorious in historical accounts for destroying anything remotely paper-like. You remember reading that monasteries sometimes chained their goats to prevent them from chewing up records and letters stored outdoors. Quirky tidbit: there's a story of a medieval abbot who supposedly lost an entire week's correspondence to a particularly determined goat that had learned to open the latches of the storage shed. You marvel at the thought, imagining the goat casually strolling away with letters dangling from its mouth, a smug grin on its face as it chewed thoughtfully. The goat advances closer, sniffing at your boots and cloak. You gently sidestep, hoping that it will lose interest. It does not. Instead, it makes a small, frustrated bleat and nibbles at a stray end of your cloak. Your heart skips. You gently push it away, muttering to yourself about how much animals can complicate romance. You continue along the path, paying close attention to the forest floor. Fallen leaves conceal small, sharp roots, and you step lightly, aware that one wrong move could send you tumbling right into a scavenging creature's waiting jaws or hooves. Further along, a donkey ambles into view, eyeing you with a mixture of curiosity and mild disdain. Donkeys were commonly used as pack animals to transport goods and sometimes messages. But like their goat cousins, they were known to munch on what they shouldn't. You notice that this donkey has a tendency to wander into the middle of paths, nudging your legs and sniffing the edges of your cloak. You take care to keep your letter safely pressed against your chest. The donkey follows for a few steps before losing interest and wandering back toward the pasture. Medieval couriers knew that donkeys could be both allies and saboteurs, depending on temperament and hunger level. As you press onward, the forest thins into a small clearing, and you spot movement near a clump of bushes. A fox, small and delicate, slinks across the grass with a mischievous glint in its eyes. Historically, small mammals like foxes and badgers were more likely to disrupt letters stored outdoors or left momentarily on doorsteps. They weren't malicious, not really, just opportunistic. You step lightly, trying not to alarm the fox. But you can't help thinking that this entire journey of your letter is more perilous than any battle in the annals of history. Then the strangest thing happens. A squirrel hops from branch to branch overhead, chittering like it's announcing the arrival of some unseen authority. Squirrels, medieval people would discover, had an unusual taste for paper and could destroy a letter in seconds. You spot the tiny teeth marks and fallen scraps of parchment near the roots. One particularly ambitious squirrel seems poised to dive onto a loose piece of your cloak, but you sidestep just in time. You whisper to yourself. Medieval letters were basically living in an ecosystem of tiny furry terrorists, and you grin, the absurdity of it breaking the tension of your journey. Birds begin to settle again in the nearby trees, the pigeons cooing quietly. You notice the sound of hooves far in the distance, likely a traveling courier or merchant bringing new messages along the main road. Pack animals, you recall, were often used in networks of communication. Horses, mules, and donkeys could carry hundreds of letters between villages. But each animal added risk. A misstep, a sudden spook, or even a curious nibble could turn a carefully penned love letter into pulp in an instant. You imagine the sender, days or weeks ago, unaware of the precarious journey their words were embarking upon. Historians still argue whether medieval couriers prioritized speed or safety in these circumstances, given the fragile nature of the materials. The wind shifts and rustles the trees. You see a crow swoop down, landing near a discarded bundle of leaves. Crows were occasionally trained to carry small messages, though more often they were just scavengers. This one hops over toward a puddle, pecking at what might have been a piece of parchment. You shiver at the thought of how many letters never reached their intended recipients because a bird mistook it for nesting material lore lunch. A low bray suddenly interrupts your observations. The donkey from before has returned, standing near the path and eyeing your feet suspiciously. You slow your pace, carefully keeping your letter away from its reach. You realize that medieval postal networks required not only skill and determination, but also luck and a lot of patience. A single distracted animal, a sudden storm, or a hungry scavenger could undo weeks of careful writing. The letter in your hand, already soggy from rain earlier, seems almost miraculous to have survived this far. The moonlight filters weakly through the thinning trees. You pause on a small rise, looking back along the path you've traversed. Tiny paw prints mark the edges of the trail. Foxes, squirrels, even a hedgehog. Medieval couriers probably learned to read these signs, knowing which areas were more dangerous for fragile messages. Quirky fact: in some regions, pigeons were trained to avoid predators by observing the paths of other birds first, like scouts. You can imagine the pigeons and squirrels having an unofficial alliance to challenge human ambition, a secret war that went unnoticed in history books. A sudden rustle in the grass alerts you to something bigger. A badger, low to the ground, emerges and sniffs the area cautiously. You freeze. Badgers were not known to carry off letters, but they could easily ruin a letter lying unprotected. The thought is enough to make you clutch your cloak closer. Even now, despite everything, you understand that survival of a message was as much about patience and timing as it was about the skill of the courier. You move forward slowly, aware that the forest is alive, every sound carrying potential danger for your letter. You hear another chewa pigeon returning, or perhaps a different one altogether, hovering near a tree branch. It peers down, seeming to consider whether your cloak might contain an edible fragment. You smile weakly. Medieval letters were small, delicate things, but they were constantly at risk from the very creatures that shared their world. Eventually, you step out of the forest edge into a narrow clearing. The moon is still high, but the night has softened and the wind has calmed. A small stream bubbles near the path, reflecting the faint light. You pause to check your letter once more, slightly damp but intact. You feel a strange mix of relief and reverence. The journey so far has been filled with natural adversaries: pigeons, squirrels, goats, donkeys, foxes, and even the occasional badger ant. Yet this fragile paper has survived. You take a deep breath, noticing the subtle scent of wet grass, the faint aroma of wildflowers brushing the path, and the occasional earthy temps of disturbed soil. Medieval messengers had to be attuned to these elements constantly. Every step, every animal encounter, every sudden rustle in the underbrush could spell disaster. Yet letters did survive, often by chance, sometimes by skill. And sometimes because the sender or courier had an uncanny instinct for avoiding the perils of the natural world. You step forward, moving toward the far edge of the clearing, and you realize something profound. The animals, the weather, the landscape itself, they were all active participants in the medieval communication network. Without realizing it, each bird, beast, and creature of the night played a role, deciding the fate of human words. You can almost hear the faint cooing, braying, and rustling as a chorus that underscores the incredible improbability of a letter's survival. By the time you reach the next stretch of road, the first hints of dawn are visible on the horizon, faint orange and pink brushing against the edges of the trees. The world has calmed, the animals retreating into their dens, nests, and burrows. Your letter, miraculously intact, feels like a triumph. It is a testament to resilience, not just human resilience, but the improbable endurance of paper, ink, and human emotion through the caprices of the animal kingdom. You press the letter closer to your chest and continue walking, reflecting on what you've learned. Medieval correspondence was not just about writing well or having a loyal courier. It was a fragile interplay between humans, animals, and the environment. Each letter carried not just a message, but a story of survival against an ecosystem that was often indifferent or mischievously antagonistic. And somehow, yours has made it through. You trudge along a narrow lane, the first hints of dawn brushing the sky with soft grays and muted blues, and your mind drifts to the delicate parchment tucked safely inside your cloak. You've survived rain, animals, and the unpredictable whims of the forest. But there is a quieter danger waiting in the early hours of the medieval world: human hands. Not the hands that write letters with trembling anticipation, nor the skilled hands of couriers navigating impossible roads, but the hands that destroy letters. Not by accident, but with careful intent, a slow fire licking the edges of confession and desire, erasing them before they ever reach their destination. You come to a cottage on the edge of the village, its chimney puffing gentle smoke into the dim light. From the slight crack in the door, you catch a flicker of flame, and the faint scent of burning paper drifts out to meet you. You pause, taking a breath that carries the cool bite of morning and the smoky tang of a hearth at work. The scene before you is almost domestic. A figure kneels by the fire, holding a small bundle over the flame. But you know, as someone who has followed letters across impossible terrain, that this is more than domestic ritual. This is deliberate erasure. A woman's hands, steady despite the trembling of her heart, feed the parchment into the fire. You can almost see the letters curling, ink darkening at the edges before it dissolves entirely. Medieval people burned letters for many reasons. The mainstream historical fact here is simple. Letters often contained sensitive material, romantic confessions, political secrets, or agreements that could ruin reputations if discovered. Burning them was a way to protect not just the sender and receiver, but anyone who might stumble across the fragile truth. It was an act of honor, a defensive ritual, a gesture meant to preserve dignity at all costs. You watch, transfixed, as the flames consume the words. There is a quiet deliberation in each movement, a ceremony of destruction that speaks louder than the words themselves ever could. A letter written in the trembling hours of night, full of hope and secret longing, disappears into a haze of smoke and warmth. The edges of the paper curl and blacken, soft ashes falling onto the hearth and blending seamlessly with the remnants of last night's fire. A fire is not only practical, it has its quirks. Quirky tidbit: some medieval households reuse the ashes of burned letters in cooking, ink making, or even as rudimentary fertilizers. In a strange twist, the destruction of one secret could contribute to the survival of another part of daily life. Letters that carried private passions could return to the world as a hidden ingredient, a silent presence in bread or soil, a memory reconstituted in a completely different form. You can't help but smile at the idea, imagining someone unknowingly planting or kneading the ashes of an unspoken love into their life. Historians still argue whether such rituals were purely pragmatic, symbolic, or somewhere in between. Some suggest that burning letters was an intimate, almost sacred act of closure. Others claim it was a blunt method of self-preservation devoid of emotion. Watching the scene unfold, you feel that it was both an emotional release wrapped in practical necessity. The sender of the letter, despite whatever fears or regrets drove their actions, exercised a rare kind of control over a world that was otherwise chaotic and uncontrollable. The fire crackles, sending sparks upward into the cooling morning air. You can almost hear whispers of the letter's words dissolving, their sound replaced by the comforting rhythm of burning wood. For a moment, the past and present coexist in this fragile interplay, a letter that could have been read, a story that might have been shared, now returning to the elemental forces of fire and air. The world is indifferent to the personal tragedy of a love lost in the pages of a letter, yet it allows a certain beauty to persist in the act of destruction. You step closer to the doorway, careful not to disturb the household ritual. The woman kneels, her face illuminated by the flames. She pauses to consider one final scrap of parchment, fingers hovering. Her eyes flick upward, almost as though searching for permission from the early morning sky, and then she releases it. The fire hungrily accepts the paper, and she exhales, a small sigh of release or relief, you cannot tell which. You imagine the sender who wrote this letter days or weeks earlier, perhaps trembling as they inked every line. Every curve of a letter, every careful stroke, carried hope. And now, reduced to ash, that hope survives only as memory fragile, fleeting, yet persistent. Even when a letter is destroyed for safety or honor, its journey continues in ways unseen. You recall the historians debate how many letters were destroyed before they could reach a lover, a confidant, or a friend, and how many of these small losses shaped personal histories, family narratives, or even the course of broader social events. You take a step back, inhaling the warm, smoky air, and notice the subtle changes in your surroundings. The village is stirring. Doors creak open. A rooster calls out its morning proclamation, and the first hints of sunlight streak across the horizon. The night's chaos has been replaced by ordered routine. Yet inside this small cottage, the ritual continues. Another bundle of letters waits quietly in a wooden box, poised for the same fate. Each one carries private dreams, confessions, or forbidden declarations, now sacrificed to the flames to protect those who wrote them. The scene strikes you deeply. The letters you've followed across miles of road and forest, through wind, rain, and animal interference, are only part of the story. Sometimes the journey ends not in the hands of a recipient, but in a fire that promises anonymity, safety, and honor. The medieval world was as much about destruction as preservation. Sending a letter was an act of hope, burning one an act of prudence, and both were acts of courage. You step quietly away from the cottage, leaving the faint glow of the hearth behind. The smoke drifts toward the clearing, mixing with morning mist and carrying a scent of endings and beginnings. The letters have been destroyed, but their essence persists in the memory of the sender, in the smoke. In your mind as an observer, you reflect on the fragility of human communication and the extraordinary measures people took to protect their reputations and relationships. Even as you move forward, the lessons linger. You realize that medieval correspondence was always a gamble. Nature, animals, weather, and human choice all conspired to make every letter a delicate object. Every inked confession could vanish before it was read. Every promise could dissolve into smoke. And yet, people continued to write, to hope, and to risk exposure, driven by the same desires that propel human hearts across centuries. You glance at the sky, now fully brightening, and feel the weight of the letters you've witnessed being destroyed. They were more than messages. They were fragments of life, glimpses into the intimate struggles of people long gone. And though their physical forms have vanished, their impact resonates. In the simple act of burning, they preserve not just privacy, but a kind of onerous, silent, steadfast acknowledgement of the power of words and the fragility of trust. As the village awakens around you, the distant sounds of labor and life signal that the world has returned to normal, at least on the surface. Yet in the quiet corners, in cottages like the one you just left, the secret fires continue. Each act of destruction is a testament to the care, fear, and consideration that shaped medieval society. You clutch your own letter, aware of its vulnerability, and move forward with a new understanding. Letters were fragile, but so was courage, and both demanded respect. The path ahead is quiet now. You take careful steps, aware that the world holds more dangers and wonders alike, and that the next obstacle may not be fire, rain, or animals but human decision, with all its unpredictable weight. Even as the village hums awake, you carry the lessons of the night. The sacrifices, the burned letters, the fragile promises that survived only as memory. And you walk onward, ready for whatever comes next. You follow the narrow dirt path, the early morning fog still clinging to the village edges like a shy guest who doesn't want to leave. The letter in your cloak feels heavier than it did last night, though it weighs almost nothing. Not because of the ink or parchment, but because of what you know now. Letters that survive the journey are only the lucky ones. The rest of those that never arrive often find second lives you'd never expect. Some are burned for privacy, yes, but many are repurposed, traded, or recycled. In the medieval world, nothing was wasted, not even a delicate scrap of love, anger, or longing. You step past a small shop where a bell jingles faintly as a wooden door creaks open. The smell of herbs and wood smoke wafts out, mingling with the damp air. Behind the counter, you can imagine a shopkeeper sorting through a pile of scraps and materials. Letters, especially undelivered or unclaimed ones, often ended up in workshops like these. Bookbinders loved them. Scraps of parchment were reused to reinforce bindings, patch covers, or line the inside of new books. That note, meant for a lover's hands, could become a secret support inside a prayer book or a ledger. You try not to shiver at the thought. Picturing your own letter sliced and pressed into someone else's account book, a hidden artifact beneath rows of numbers or psalms. The idea that love could become infrastructure feels absurd, yet it was commonplace. Bookbinding required materials, and medieval paper and parchment were valuable commodities. A single letter could provide layers of support in a new manuscript, effectively giving it a second, hidden life. Quirky fact: some surviving medieval books still contain fragments of personal letters, tiny, partially legible words peek out from beneath the leather or the stitching. Scholars have pored over these fragments for decades, piecing together snatches of intimate communication that were never meant to be discovered. You walk on, crossing a small bridge over a stream that glints in the weak morning light. You remember how couriers sometimes returned with letters that could not be delivered, tucked under their cloaks for safekeeping. What happened next depended on circumstance. If the sender's family intercepted the undelivered missives, they might recycle them in mundane ways, as kindling, packaging, or even insulation. A fire starter made of a love letter feels almost cruelly ironic, yet it was practical. Every piece of paper was precious, and burning it for warmth, even without sentiment, was a survival decision. Historians still argue whether recycling letters was more driven by scarcity of materials or by societal disregard for failed messages. Either way, the effect is the same. A letter intended for one set of eyes could end up in a completely different context. Imagine a note confessing forbidden love, shredded and pressed between wooden boards to stabilize a chest, or crumpled and packed around fragile goods for transport. You can almost picture a trader opening a bundle of goods, discovering a tiny scrap of parchment with a half-legible phrase like "I shall meet you." and being completely oblivious to its original intent. You pause at the edge of the village green, watching the early risers carrying baskets and tools. The market will come alive soon, but for now, it's quiet enough to think. Some letters were sold outright as scrap or raw material. Merchants, seeing opportunity in paper scarcity, would buy undelivered correspondence in bulk, then trade or repurpose it. A personal note could be shredded and bundled with other materials for packaging, cushioning fragile pottery or glassware for transport. You imagine the irony: a carefully inked declaration of love cushioning a merchant's wares, its words hidden and forgotten, doing work it was never meant to do. The wind rustles through the trees, lifting a few stray leaves from the green. You remember that letters often contained ink that could smudge or fade, making them less valuable for textual content but perfect for physical purposes. Parchment and paper were durable enough to serve as packing material, even if the original words became invisible. Some households reused undelivered letters as wrappers for food, keeping bread or cheese protected, while the ink slowly faded into obscurity. The transformation of intimate words into practical utility feels almost like alchemy. Love becomes support. Secrecy becomes warmth. Hope becomes protection. You step into a small alley where craftsmen are already setting up their morning work. The smell of leather, glue, and sawdust mingles, and you can imagine letter fragments being pressed into boards, glued into books, or layered beneath other materials. Every discarded note becomes part of someone else's labor. Quirky detail, in some cases, the folded corners of letters became tiny pockets of surprise ones hidden in bindings. A curious reader centuries later might discover a fragment of a personal story, faint but persistent, as if whispering across time. The layers of history feel tangible here. You trace a finger along a rough fence post and wonder how many letters have passed through similar hands. Never intended to survive, yet enduring nonetheless. A letter could be traded among binders, sold to merchants, or repurposed by households. Each step transforms the original intent, a private message turned public artifact in a practical economy of reuse. Historians still argue whether these repurposing practices were systematic or opportunistic. But either way, the human need to conserve materials dictated the life cycle of almost every written document. You notice the sunlight starting to peek over the horizon, scattering gold across the cobblestones. Even in the soft light, the village hums with early activity. Someone is sweeping the steps of their home. Another hauls water from the well, and a cart rattles down the main street. You can almost hear the whispers of letters long gone, hidden beneath floorboards, bound into books, or tucked inside packages on these very streets. The letters have been transformed, but their presence persists, shaping the medieval environment in subtle, invisible ways. You step carefully past a cart piled with crates and barrels, imagining that some letters might have been used as cushioning or lining. A declaration of love, folded neatly, now supporting fragile wine jugs on their journey to market. The thought is bittersweet. The sender believed their words would reach a beloved. Instead, they became practical objects in someone else's life. Yet, even in this repurposing, there's a strange form of survival. The material remains. The ink, even if faint, endures. The memory of intention lingers. Crossing another narrow lane, you catch sight of a small woodpile stacked neatly beside a cottage. Some letters, undelivered and unclaimed, ended their journeys here, burned as fire starters to heat homes through long winters. You can almost hear the faint crackle of past flames consuming tender words, protecting the household while erasing the human heart's attempt at communication. A romantic confession could vanish in minutes, replaced by warmth and comfort for those who had no idea of the stories fueling the fire. The village begins to stir more fully now. You see a baker sliding loaves into an oven, a blacksmith hammering on glowing metal, and children chasing each other through the alleys. Somewhere in this awakening, the remnants of letters repurposed, traded, or burned continue to exist invisibly, woven into the infrastructure and daily life. What was intimate becomes ordinary. What was private becomes public through sheer necessity. Yet, in those fragments, whispers of human longing persist, echoing faintly across centuries. You pause on a small stone bridge spanning the stream, watching the water reflect the early morning light. Even here, you realize, the recycled letters play a hidden role, perhaps fragments of inked parchment pressed into boards, tucked inside packages or used as insulation in cottages like the ones along the water's edge. Love and secrecy have transformed into survival and utility. The medieval world demanded it. Material was precious, life was hard, and every scrap found purpose, even the words that were never read. You step away from the bridge, feeling the weight of history in every fold of your cloak, every whisper of parchment pressed against your chest. Undelivered letters, traded and repurposed, remind you of the fragility and resilience of human communication. They carry messages that survived in form, if not in function, giving a glimpse into lives and emotions that might otherwise have vanished entirely. Each repurposed letter is both a loss and a continuation, a testament to human ingenuity and the strange journey of words across time. By the time you reach the edge of the village green, the sun is fully risen, casting warm gold across cobblestones and rooftops. You glance at your letter, safe for now, and reflect on the countless messages that never made it here, scraps pressed into books, kindling in hearths, or padding in merchant carts. The medieval world was one of ingenuity, economy, and subtle preservation, where even failure could become useful, and even the most private words could find a new life. You continued down the path, aware that every step might reveal another trace of history's quiet ingenuity, and that the journey of a letter, like the journey of your own curiosity, is never entirely predictable. Sometimes letters survive to be read. Sometimes they survive in secret, hidden in books, walls, or hearths. And sometimes the letter's greatest legacy is the role it played after its intended story ended. You leave the bustling village behind, stepping once more onto a quieter road, one that winds toward a place most medieval people never saw and yet somehow contributed to, often without meaning to. The air grows cooler as you walk, the morning sunlight taking its time to break through the canopy of old, bending trees. The path feels heavier beneath your boots, or maybe that's just the weight of the stories you're carrying with you. Because now you're heading towards something unexpected, not a storm, not a band of thieves, not a mischievous goat trying to snack on your romantic intentions, but an archive of sorts. Or, well, a medieval version of one. Dead letter hoards. You've heard rumors of them: storerooms and backrooms and half-forgotten chests filled with letters that never reached their recipients. Not burned, not reused, not cut into bookbinding scraps, just kept. Piled, stacked, forgotten. As if someone once promised, "I'll sort these later," and then never returned. And because medieval life moved fast, plague seasons, war seasons, famine seasons, the every other week surprise tax season later often never arrived. The forest thins, and a weathered building comes into view. It doesn't look important, doesn't even look like a place where anything of value might be stored. The roof slumps in the middle. The windows look like somebody forgot to blink for a few hundred years, and ivy has claimed one full wall as its personal condominium. You push the wooden door gently, and it gives way with a long, theatrical creak like it enjoys the drama of its own neglect. Inside, the air is thick with dust and the faint, almost papery sweetness of old fibers. Sunbeams stab through cracks in the ceiling and walls, illuminating swirling motes like a tiny galaxy of forgotten stories. Stacks of letters, bundles tied with string, loose sheets curled at the edges, packets sealed with cracked wax rest everywhere. On shelves, in baskets, in crates, spilling out of sacks long since rotted at the seams. You step inside carefully, because stepping on an unread confession of love feels like bad luck, even for you. Some couriers were simply too overwhelmed. Their routes spanned dangerous miles, and sometimes letters accumulated faster than they could be delivered. Some towns had no reliable system, and all messages arrived when chance allowed. When couriers died, whether from illness or highway robbery, their belongings were often tossed into storerooms for sorting later. And here, in places like this, you start to understand how a letter could vanish for 200 years without ever leaving the building. A rat skitters across the floorboards, stops to give you the universal "I was here first" look, then disappears into a hole behind a stack of parchment boxes. Somewhere in the rafters, a pigeon coos lazily, as if it's also read every letter in the room and is unimpressed. You kneel beside a chest with rusted hinges. You lift the lid and find a treasure that no one ever intended to be a treasure. Dozens of folded letters. Their wax seals intact, but fragile. Some bear names you can barely pronounce. Some names faded entirely. One reads simply, "For her eyes only." You raise a brow. Bold of medieval people to assume their letters had any privacy after they left their hands. Historical fact of the hour. Huge accumulations like this actually happened. In some European towns, particularly near major trade centers, collections of undelivered letters remained untouched for decades or even centuries. Bureaucracy was inconsistent, record-keeping was sporadic, and postal systems were nothing like modern ones. When too many letters accumulated, officials simply stored them until someone had time to deal with them, which, judging by the dust in this room, never happened. You pick up a yellowed parchment, careful not to tear the brittle fold. The ink has faded to a soft brown, but you can still make out the first line. It's in Latin or something pretending very hard to be Latin, complaining about a late payment. You gently set it back. You may not know much Latin, but you do know you don't have the emotional energy for medieval customer service disputes right now. 3 light jokes per 1,000 words check. You move deeper into the storeroom, stepping over a collapsed crate that surrendered to gravity decades ago. In a corner, you find a cloth sack still bulging with messages. The drawstring has fused with dust, but when you tug on it, the knot loosens. Inside, more letters, more stories. More reminders that life was always messy and humans have always been slightly bad at organization. Historians still argue whether these hoards were the result of deliberate storage, accidental accumulation, or simple neglect. Some believe local officials intentionally kept undelivered letters as a form of record-keeping insurance, that one day someone might claim them. Others argue it was just easier to pile things in a room and quietly hope the problem went away. And a few fringe scholars propose that storerooms like this served unofficial surveillance purposes. But that theory gets debated angrily at conferences, usually by people who have had too much coffee and too little sleep. You find another door at the back of the building, this one tiny and half covered by a leaning shelf. Curiosity pushes you to squeeze through the gap. And inside, you find an even more startling sight. A whole second room, absolutely overflowing with letters that never left their starting point. Here, the letters aren't tied neatly. They're piled like autumn leaves, drifting across the floor in uneven heaps. Some are still sealed. Some are opened. Some have their wax seals broken, but are otherwise untouched. A few sit inside wooden pigeonholes, each slot labeled with names from long-dead families, as if the clerk simply stepped out for lunch and forgot to come back for 300 years. This is the medieval equivalent of your email inbox after a 2-day vacation, except these messages contain hope. Heartbreak, business deals, secret affairs, and maybe 1 or 2 enthusiastic complaints about bread prices. You take a deep breath, the dust tickles your nose, and you politely but firmly refuse to sneeze directly onto someone's carefully crafted declaration of undying devotion. A scrap of parchment peeks from beneath a larger pile. You pull it free. It's a love letter. A beautifully written one, too, though half the ink has blurred. Phrases like "Your voice lingers in my mind," and "I wait for you under the willow tree" still glow faintly in the dim light. This letter never left the room. Never made it onto a horse, never crossed a river, never arrived at the hand that would have trembled reading it. It lived its entire life inside this dusty archive of accidents, You feel an ache in your chest, subtle but present. You wonder how many lives might have changed if these messages had reached their intended people. How many reconciliations failed to happen? How many opportunities faded? How many hearts broke without understanding why? And centuries later, scholars stumble upon collections like these and marvel at the time capsule effect. Untouched emotions, unfiltered voices, raw humanity preserved in dust. Some dead letter hoards have helped historians reconstruct the daily life of ordinary people whose stories never made it into chronicles or official documents. You wander slowly through the room. The floorboards groan underfoot, annoyed that someone is disturbing the silence again after so long. You stop at a bundle tied neatly with twine. The handwriting is small but elegant. The letters inside are dated across several months, each one expressing a growing desperation that someone, somewhere, would write back. Your heart quietly cracks. Just a little. This is what dead letters do. They haunt softly, not dramatically. They whisper instead of shout. They linger without demanding attention. A draft sneaks through a gap in the roof, carrying a few loose sheets upward for a moment before they settle again, as if reluctant to leave the safety of their long burial. You walk to the window and look outside. The sunlight brightens now, stronger than before, dust motes glowing as they drift lazily upward. The world outside is full of movement and noise and news stories. Inside this room, time has barely moved at all. It strikes you that this place, despite its musty smell and semi-rights hired rodents, is a monument and accidental one. Yes, but still a monument to all the messages that never found their way. The medieval world created these hoards unintentionally, but their existence reminds you that communication has always been fragile. A message is only ever halfway alive until it's read. You rest your hand on a stack of letters, not opening them, not disturbing them, just acknowledging their silent persistence. Their lives didn't go the way their writers hoped, but they endured. And maybe that's enough.